when the Boeing B-29 Superfortress thundered into Japanese skies for the first time. It looked like nothing the world had seen before. Vast, gleaming, and impossibly high above the reach of most interceptors, the silver leviathan embodied America's industrial might. For civilians, its shadow was a terrifying omen. For Japan's military, it was a nightmare that rewrote the rules of war. The skies, once thought sacred, now belonged to a new master. In the summer of 1944, Japanese airmen caught their first glimpse of the B-29 Superfortress. From the ground, it seemed almost unreal, its massive 141-foot wingspan catching the sunlight, its polished fuselage glinting like a floating fortress in the heavens. To soldiers and civilians who had grown accustomed to smaller bombers, this machine seemed like a moving city in the sky. Compared to the B-17 and B-24, which Japan had learned to counter, this new aircraft appeared overwhelming in size and promise. Japanese analysts initially dismissed it as another example of American excess. They believed such a giant could never maneuver effectively, predicting it would be slow, clumsy, and vulnerable to coordinated attacks. Pilots were trained to treat it as a bigger flying fortress, assuming aggressive frontal charges or tail pursuits would bring it down. Confidence was high until the first interceptions shattered those illusions. The B-29 cruised at over 30,000 feet, higher than most Japanese aircraft could even reach. Fighters climbing to interception altitude overheated, stalled, or ran dangerously low on fuel before making contact. Those few that succeeded found themselves under relentless fire from remotely controlled turrets, each one capable of unleashing perfectly timed streams of 50 caliber rounds. The giant was not clumsy, nor was it defenseless. It was a predator cloaked in steel. For Japanese commanders, the shock was immediate and sobering. What they had dismissed as an oversized experiment was now rewriting the balance of the air war. The Superfortress was not simply a bigger bomber, it was an entirely new species of warfare. To understand the devastation the B-29 inflicted, one must look at Japan's defenses before its arrival. The Imperial Japanese Army and Navy had built their doctrine around intercepting medium-range bombers and engaging in short, decisive battles. Aircraft such as the Mitsubishi A6M0 and Nakajima Ki-43 Hayabusa excelled in close maneuver-based combat. Against B-25 Mitchells or the occasional B-17, these fighters performed admirably. Doctrine emphasized agility, pilot skill, and sacrificial bravery, qualities well suited to earlier encounters. Anti-aircraft artillery reflected the same assumptions. Guns were designed for altitudes under 20,000 feet, firing at slower planes that presented clear, low-level targets. By 1943, however, cracks were already showing. Fuel shortages crippled pilot training, leaving rookies in the cockpit with barely enough hours to fly. Radar coverage was sparse, leaving commanders blind until bombs were already falling. Ammunition was scarce, and experienced pilots were dying faster than they could be replaced. Despite these failings, Japanese leadership clung to the belief that their defensive system was sound. They trusted in their interceptors' speed, their pilots' courage, and the resilience of their anti-aircraft fire. Then came the B-29. It cruised high above the effective ceiling of Japanese flak, flying at speeds beyond the grasp of most interceptors. When fighters attempted to climb, their engines strained to the breaking point, often failing before contact could be made. Even when pilots closed the distance, the overlapping fire from the Superfortress formations tore through them. The reality was undeniable. Japan's entire defense network was built for a different era. The arrival of the B-29 did not just challenge their systems, it rendered them obsolete. As intelligence reports trickled in, disbelief gave way to alarm. Pilots described the B-29 as a fortress in the clouds, one that climbed higher, flew faster, and struck deeper than anything Japan had imagined possible. Its four Wright R3350 duplex Cyclone engines, each turbo-supercharged, propelled it to speeds exceeding 350 miles per hour with a service ceiling above 30,000 feet. For most Japanese aircraft, this altitude was unreachable. For those that managed, combat was brief and brutal. The bomber's range was perhaps its most shocking attribute. With a combat radius surpassing 1,500 miles, the Superfortress could strike Japan from bases far beyond reach of counterattack. Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, cities once thought untouchable, were suddenly vulnerable. Geography, once Japan's shield, was meaningless. The home islands had become a battlefield. Defensively, the bomber seemed almost supernatural. Remote-controlled gun stations, guided by advanced fire control systems, created interlocking fields of .50 caliber fire. Japanese pilots attempting frontal or rear assaults often never returned. Casualty rates soared, further depleting Japan's dwindling squadrons. Reports also noted its pressurized cabin, which allowed American crews to fly long missions without the fatigue and oxygen starvation that plagued Japanese aviators. Add to this its staggering bomb load of up to 20,000 pounds, double what Japan's own bombers could carry, and the B-29 was more than a machine. It was a flying arsenal, a city in the sky that brought death from above with industrial efficiency. But as terrifying as the technical details were, what truly haunted Japan was what they implied. America's industry had built something Japan could not hope to match, and this was only the beginning. Stay with us because the first engagements against the Superfortress would prove just how devastating this new weapon would become. The first serious trial of the B-29 against Japan's defenses came in June 1944, when bombers flying from China struck the Yawata steelworks on Kyushu. Though only a fraction of the new aircraft participated, the psychological impact was enormous. For the first time in the war, Japan's home islands, once thought untouchable, were under direct attack. To the military, the raid was a humiliating revelation. To civilians, it was the start of a nightmare. Japanese pilots scrambled to intercept, but the majority of fighters could not climb high enough before the bombers completed their runs. Engines overheated, fuel burned too quickly, and oxygen starvation slowed pilots before they could even engage. Those few who reached the Superfortress formations discovered that brute courage was no match for technology. Remote-controlled turrets unleashed precise bursts from multiple angles, shredding attacking planes before they could fire effectively. Anti-aircraft batteries fared no better. Designed for lower altitudes, their shells exploded thousands of feet beneath the high-flying giants. Radar coverage, already patchy, provided little warning. Entire cities watched as the shimmering bombers sailed overhead, seemingly untouchable, dropping destruction with eerie calm. Though losses were minimal for the Americans, the message was devastatingly clear for Japan. The B-29 was not a nuisance, it was an existential threat. With each raid, the inadequacy of Japan's defenses became harder to deny. The war had entered a new phase, and Japan was woefully unprepared for what was coming next. Faced with the overwhelming performance of the Superfortress, Japan scrambled for solutions. The first strategy was to adapt existing fighters for high-altitude combat. Planes such as the Nakajima Ki-44 Shoki and the Ki-84 Hayate were stripped of weight and equipped with more powerful engines, but even these struggled to match the B-29 at its cruising altitude. Their climb rates fell short, and fuel shortages limited the number of sorties possible. In desperation, commanders sanctioned Tai-Atari deliberate ramming attacks. Entire squadrons were formed with the mission of sacrificing themselves to bring down the bombers. Pilots hurled their planes into formations, sometimes damaging or destroying a B-29, but at catastrophic cost to Japan's already dwindling air arm. These kamikaze-style interceptions embodied desperation more than strategy. Night operations offered another option. Modified fighters such as the Nakajima J-1N1S Gecko carried primitive radar and upward-firing cannons, attempting ambushes under cover of darkness. Results were limited, as Japan's radar technology lagged far behind Allied systems. Interceptions were rare, and the B-29s adjusted quickly, shifting altitudes or striking at night themselves with firebombing raids that devastated entire cities. Anti-aircraft defenses were also reworked. Heavier guns were developed, but production delays, material shortages, and lack of trained crews ensured that coverage remained thin. American planners outpaced every adaptation, changing tactics faster than Japan could respond. Each measure cost resources Japan could not spare, and none provided a permanent solution. The Superfortress continued its relentless assault, bleeding Japan's defenses dry. Yet the worst was still to come, not just physical devastation, but a psychological collapse that would shake the empire to its core. If the B-29 battered Japan's defenses physically, it broke them psychologically. For years, civilians and soldiers believed the home islands were untouchable. The war might rage across China and the Pacific, but Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya were sacred ground. That illusion vanished as shimmering formations of superfortresses appeared, their deep engine rumble rolling across the landscape like a funeral drum. For pilots, the dread was immediate. Each mission against the B-29 meant climbing into thin air, knowing their aircraft was outclassed in speed, altitude, and firepower. Survivors described the futility of empty guns, overheating engines, and watching the bombers cruise serenely above them. The formations came to represent inevitability itself, targets that could be seen but not destroyed. For civilians, the terror was even greater. When the bombing strategy shifted from precision strikes to incendiary raids, cities turned into infernos. The March 1945 firebombing of Tokyo incinerated vast neighborhoods, leaving survivors to describe hellish winds and seas of flame. Nagoya, Kobe, and Osaka followed, their residents helpless beneath the rain of destruction. The deep drone of the B-29 became synonymous with fire, death, and despair. The psychological toll was crippling. Civilians stopped believing in victory. Soldiers doubted their commanders. The idea of defeat shifted from unthinkable to inevitable. By mid-1945, the empire was haunted by a single machine, the silver giant that ruled their skies. And yet, as devastating as the firebombing campaigns were, they were not the B-29's most infamous missions. Stay with us, because what came next would not just devastate cities, it would change the course of history itself. The B-29's legacy in Japan cannot be measured by bomb tonnage alone. It was the weapon that shattered illusions, exposed technological inferiority, and revealed the overwhelming industrial power of the United States. Militarily, it proved that courage and sacrifice could not compensate for outdated defenses. Doctrines built around agile dogfights and short-range battles collapsed before a machine designed for altitude, speed, and range. The firebombing campaign left entire cities reduced to ashes. Tokyo burned under an inferno that killed more civilians in a single night than either atomic bomb would. The relentless raids stripped away the last remnants of morale. Civilians who once believed in Japan's divine protection now cowered at the sound of distant engines. Soldiers tasked with defending the homeland knew the futility of their mission, watching each sortie drain lives and machines they could never replace. But the B-29's most infamous role came in August 1945. Two aircraft, Enola Gay and Bockscar, delivered the atomic bombs to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In those moments, the Superfortress was no longer merely a bomber. It became the vessel of apocalypse, the machine that ushered in the nuclear age. For Japan, the war ended not in glorious battle, but in the shadow of two mushroom clouds carried on the wings of the B-29. In the years that followed, Japanese pilots, commanders, and civilians remembered the Superfortress not simply as an enemy plane, but as a symbol. It represented inevitability, the crushing weight of industrial war that no sacrifice could overcome. Post-war memoirs describe it as both awe-inspiring and terrifying, a silver giant that embodied America's ability to strike anywhere, anytime. Even today, when a surviving B-29 flies at an airshow, its deep engine rumble evokes the same mixture of awe and dread. It is remembered not just as a machine of destruction, but as a harbinger of modern warfare, a reminder that Japan's skies, once thought untouchable, were forever breached by a giant from across the ocean. The story of the B-29 Superfortress is not just about an aircraft, but about the moment the balance of war shifted forever. It was the silver giant that tore through Japan's defenses, reduced its cities to ash, and carried the bombs that ended the war. More than steel and engines, it represented the unstoppable weight of industrial might, innovation, and strategy colliding against a nation already stretched to its limits. For Japan, it was the sound of inevitability. For the world, it was the dawn of modern warfare. Even today, the echo of its engines reminds us of a time when the sky itself became a weapon of overwhelming power. And this story is only one of many untold chapters in aviation history. If you want more hidden truths about the machines that shaped our past and defined our future, make sure to subscribe, because the next legend is waiting.